This is the Classic Auto Mall Show. Broadcast from the studios inside the Classic Auto Mall in Morgantown, Pennsylvania. Just 1 hour west of Philadelphia at Pennsylvania Turnpike exit 298. Featuring nearly 1,000 classic, vintage, and barn-find vehicles for sale under one climate-controlled roof. Now, here's your host, Classic Auto Mall president and the man with all the toys, Stewart Howden.
And good morning, show number 181. On a cold, wintry Pennsylvania. I'm tired of this cold weather.
Yeah. We about had it.
We have had enough. Please
done.
stop.
I am done.
Whatever. Uncle. I call Uncle.
Or Auntie.
Or Auntie, yeah. So before we get to our fantastic guest, who wants to guess first on how many cars we have in inventory at this very moment? Steve?
Well, this includes sales, outgoing cars as well, right?
Whichever.
Just
I'm going to stick with
a number.
Okay, wait a minute. 1040.
All right. JR?
1,055.
How about 1,032 cars in inventory at this very moment? You're so close. But
wow.
You can't win with going over. So the prize will carry over and double for next week, whatever that is. So, but enough of us. Let's get to our fantastic guest this morning, Mr. Rob Dyson. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning, Stewart.
How are you this morning?
Yes, you know, when I hear 1,040 cars, I'm sitting back saying, God, don't tempt me.
Yeah, it's too much. It's like you talk about a kid in a candy store. The biggest problem we have is when somebody wants to come buy a car in person. It's much better online because you get quite distracted here. You know, it's kind of like a rodeo clown, except it's a bunch of cars. So.
Exactly.
So, Rob, race car driver, team owner, chairman and CEO of the Dyson Kisner Moran Corporation, board chairman of the IMSM Museum Board of Directors, been in the radio business. Wow, you've had quite the career.
Yeah, well, you got to keep the ball rolling. You got to get up in the morning and have something to do. So I'm generally keeping myself pretty busy, that's for sure. You know,
it seems to be the formula for long living and success is just get up and go to work every day and do what you need to do and get as much done. And as my business partner always says, do your best and forget about the rest.
That's right. Well, the thing is that I don't want to get into a position where I am retired.
Right.
Is my role in the company changing? Sure, Chris is getting more involved in it. My daughter's getting more involved in it. Other things that I accomplishing and getting that going. Pleased that the museum is doing so well.
Sure.
I look forward to talking about that. But,
absolutely.
I'm very blessed, really, with my life. I've had a lot of things that I've been able to do and enjoy. I don't like vacations because I don't really need one.
Right, exactly. My wife always says that our vacations somehow miraculously end up around a car event. How does there happen to be a Concours d'Elegance just right here in our backyard when we're at this lovely resort? So.
You too.
Yeah, you can keep busy. I mean, it's like all my retired buddies around here, they're not retired. They're all doing judging at Concours d'Elegances, and they're gone every weekend, or they're at a race, or they're at some kind of automotive something, and they're constantly busy. And I love it because I have other friends who retire and sat on the couch and didn't live very long because of that.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
And you've done, I mean, gosh, you started out in the radio business back in the day, right?
Yeah, I bought my first radio station. I was in grad school at Cornell,
right,
at the business school up there, and the Johnson School wasn't a Johnson School then. And I had in the area that I was at, I was in the radio business when I was in undergrad school in Marietta, Ohio.
Right, that's where you went to college, right? I
wanted to get back into the business, right. And a local radio station came up for sale, and I worked the deal while I was in grad school. So my last 4 or 5 months of grad school, I was going back and forth from Ithaca to Poughkeepsie, New York.
Right.
To start running the radio business, and it got to be fairly large. At one time, I was the largest single owner of radio stations in the country.
Wow.
And that was when deregulation took place, and sold them all off over varying times.
Sure.
The radio business has changed a lot because there are lots of alternative sources of music primarily,
right.
But also news and everything. But it was a great industry when I was in it. And was very successful for me. It was a springboard to all the other things that I've done.
Sure. I mean, yeah, radio is a different animal. I mean, when you've got, you look at the equipment we have in our studio, and 15, 20 years ago, you couldn't afford to do what we're doing. Now, kids in their basement can have a successful podcast or show or whatever you want to call it. So,
Exactly.
So, though you were interested in racing from an early on, your first Indy race was in 1962, I read somewhere.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, it was 62. My dad took, my mother and dad took my younger brother and me, my younger brother Pete,
right,
now deceased, and we went out there to see Roger Ward and Len Sutton, two
nice
leader cars come first and second. And that was when the race was 5 and a half hours long.
Right.
And there was one rear engine car in it. That was the Mickey Thompson rear engine car with Dan Gurney in it.
Wow.
And we were guests of the Sheridan Thompson organization, and right. Sheridan Thompson was the sponsor of A.J. Foyt's cars. So I went out there 2 weeks before to go to qualifying. I was only 16 and had a pit pass, and
nice.
went around the pit passes and walked into I was in the garage with Foyt and all those people, and George Vignotti and several other people, and it was just a great experience. And that was kind of where my epiphany was, that someday I'm going to get into racing in some bases.
So when, now the board chairman of the Indianapolis Motor Museum, that's got to be a pinch me moment when you realize that, 50 years earlier you were at the track and you wouldn't have even guessed that you'd have that kind of involvement with the track that you probably fell in love with racing with.
I got to admit that now that you bring it up, it is kind of, I never thought about it, but you're right. I mean, it was an opportunity that I had. Tony George asked me to be on the museum board, and I just progressed through and became board chair. I'm stepping down. I'm stepping down as board chair. I'll still be on the board.
Right.
But during that time, we were able to. We just finished a $65 million redo of the museum. We have that's going to open on April 1st. For the general public.
Sure.
And so people coming to the Speedway in May are going to see an entirely different, transformed facility that's going to have movies, dioramas, all sorts of simulators. It's going to have a display of a wide variety of cars. It's going to have the Penske Pavilion. Roger is going to bring down a roster of his Indy winning cars, plus all of his trophies and everything that's going to be on display. We're going to have, it's going to have real, for anybody that believes that the Speedway and the 500 is one of the greatest races in the world, they'll see a museum that ties in with that.
That's fantastic. And your landlord apparently, I guess, told you that you couldn't expand out, you couldn't expand up, but you needed to double the size of the museum. Is that?
Well, it was interesting that we thought about it. We also thought about tearing the building down, but it's turned out that we could do an adaptive reuse inside the building.
Right.
And we did expand it. We expanded the floor space. We put a mezzanine in above the master, the big main hall.
Right.
We put a mezzanine. That got us an additional 7,300 square feet. We knocked down a few walls inside and transformed it. And it's going to be something for people to see. They're going to be very, very pleased and very impressed.
And you're funding this with just some leftover cars that were down in the basement, right?
Well, that was part of it. The basic fundraising has all taken place.
Right.
The idea behind the sale of the few cars that the deaccession that we've done was done to create an endowment for the museum.
Fantastic.
Yeah, an endowment for the museum. Many museums live hand to mouth.
We know that, yes.
And we're creating an endowment so then we can pull on that endowment to enable us to care for the collection primarily, expand the collection when needed, and to maintain all the
sure.
great artifacts that we've got. So the idea is that's the idea of creating that endowment.
Well, and it looks like you're going to hit your goal and then some. I guess your goal was 100 million, and the first two sales got a big chunk of that taken care of, right?
Yeah, we're hoping that we get 100, 110 million and put that. Some of it we will use to acquire some cars. There's a bunch of cars that we kind of are targeting, and then we'll put the rest into the endowment that can go toward the good works of the museum.
Well, it's like you said. I mean, we have friends in the museum business who don't have any endowment and have to raise all their funds every year, and it's difficult task to say the least. And of course, the interesting is the first two cars that you sold, arguably the most valuable cars. I mean, the Mercedes is the second most valuable car ever sold at auction.
Correct.
Donated to the museum in 1965. Be interesting to know what the insurance valuation in 1965 was on that car.
Well, the interesting thing is that is a car that is clearly a magnificent automobile. Magnificent automobile.
Right.
Never raced at the Speedway, never raced in the United States. So you have a car that had no attachment to the Indianapolis.
Right.
I mean, it was great that it was there, but I think what we're doing is we're taking the funding and transferring it into the mission that more suits our mission. Are
there lots of cars and things that are out there that maybe were beyond your reach before that maybe you can get now that you've got a little jingle in your pocket, and maybe you can get some things that might obviously make more sense, like you said, than the cars that didn't run at Indy, including the 64 Ferrari 250 LM that never ran at Indy.
That's exactly right. Both of those cars, they're super cars. They're just unbelievably great cars. They don't fit with our mission.
Sure. Well, and the interesting thing about the Ferrari is that it wasn't supposed to win Le Mans, and it was in the prototype class because they couldn't even afford to homologate it. So
that was an example of Ferrari freezing out his largest dealer.
Right.
I'm sure that there was some word spoken between the two of them.
Sure.
And Eddie, of course, was very close to Enzo, and they had a long-term relationship.
Sure.
And what it was is, all right, we'll just go run and we'll make this into a race car. And he told his guys, run as hard as you can until either we win or it breaks. Well, by golly, it worked.
It sure did. Well, the last overall win at Le Mans until, 2023, right? I mean,
that's right.
Wow. So that's pretty significant in the Ferrari world.
And the Ferrari that won in 23 was not really a Ferrari. It was a Dallara chassis.
Right.
It had Ferrari, maybe it had Ferrari valve covers, but the rest of it was pretty much done by other vendors.
Well,
so
that's like
Ferrari.
Yeah, that's like Formula One. I mean, the engine is supplied by somebody else, and it's Aston Martin, but then it's this engine and so on. And it's even hard to kind of keep up with the players. Although it's exciting that Cadillac is getting into the Formula One scene, especially now with the popularity in the U.S. of Formula One. It's pretty exciting times for it.
For sure.
What excites you the most that's still on the ledger? I know next week the remainder of the 9 remaining cars are going to be sold at the RM auction down in Miami. Which one are you most excited to see and watch sell?
Well, I think there are a lot of great cars. I mean, they've got a 1908 pre-war Mercedes Grand Prix car. Right. That's a beauty. Boy, that's really a terrific car. I think the sleeper car of all of them is the Corvette.
I do too. I think that car is going to spark some interest of guys that are kind of a different breed than the guys that would buy the Mercedes and the Ferraris. It's a different guy, a successful American guy who's a Corvette guy, who's, all his life has been around Corvettes, and would be the holy grail of any collection, obviously.
Well, yeah, this is probably among the most famous of all the cars that ever raced in sports cars, and the bones of it, and the origin of it, and the people that had their hands involved in the project pretty illustrious group of really great people.
Yeah, I'm not so certain that the estimate on the price is not a little light on that one. I wonder if it will do a little better than the...
I hope so.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I've got to imagine that, even though they're not your cars, it's going to be kind of a little bit of a nerve-wracking moment there. I mean, you're going to sit there for 9 cars, 4 minutes a car. Yeah, that's going to be a half hour of wow.
Oh, it's going to be, I can tell you that we were on the edge of our seat when we were over in Europe.
Wow.
We'll be on the edge of the seat because it's important that we get that we execute this correctly. So then it inures to the long-term benefit of the museum.
Yeah, I mean, you're just stewards of this facility, and many generations to come will enjoy this and be benefit or not benefit because of what you guys are doing in the next next week.
Absolutely right.
So, and I how exciting, and like I said, the Stuttgart thing, I mean, that was crazy, and all of us who watch these kind of things, I mean, it's just amazing, and like the 57 Corvette, $5 to $7 million. I think it's a magnesium body. I mean,
yes.
That's
amazing thing is that you sit back and say a magnesium body, and the fact that it's in such great shape is incredible.
Well, and
I think it'll be a great car.
I do too.
I'm really looking forward to having a successful auction for all of the cars. Absolutely.
I mean, it'll be fun because there's such a variety of things. A Ford GT40, a Benetton Formula One car, a 1930s Bugatti. I mean, it's a who's who of race cars.
That GT40 is the real deal. It's one of the few original GT40s with real history.
Right.
And it's the car.
Right.
I mean, it's not been modified or anything. I mean, it's the real deal automobile.
And the livery is really interesting. I tried to do some research. I couldn't quite figure out all the twists and turns. The Gulf Oil livery on those things was, pretty recognizable and famous. And this was a livery that I think a lot of people had never seen on this particular car.
Well, it's the livery that it raced at Sebring.
Right.
It was the last race that it did.
Wow.
So that's the livery that it's in.
It's
we just felt that was it's authentic.
Sure.
But it's the real car.
Well, and I would imagine that the interest in this collection of cars has to be global. I mean, people are from all over the world are probably ringing your phone like crazy and wanting information and all that good stuff. It's interesting. Are there nice dossier and folders on all the cars and lots of good information?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go online at the RM auction website and get the details on each car, and it's that alone is all of those cars have real interesting histories and are in and of themselves very, 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 very unique cars.
Sure. And it'll be funny because the $1 million car will seem like, oh, okay, $1 million. But, I mean, it's funny how the perception of that goes and things like that, even though that's very significant as well, too. So
that's right.
So you got your start in racing. Did you got your competition license at Watkins Glen, which is kind of your favorite track or home track, I guess?
Yeah, that was my first driver school was at Thompson, Connecticut.
Right.
Which fortunately is still going. It was a really good kind of gnarly facility, but that was my first acquaintance with SCCA racing,
right.
And it was a driver school. And then we went up to Watkins Glen, and in those days it was my wife and I, and went up to Watkins Glen and went through the instruction and the pace laps and all that. Then we had a race at the end. I think it was a 5-lap race at the end, which I won.
Wow.
And then they hand you your regional license. And I think you have to run several races before you become a national driver. But in those days, that was a big deal. I mean, I was really, really pleased that I got the license. And the deal I have with my wife is that, look, I just want to learn what it's like out there. Following Chris Economaki's thing, what's it like out there? I was planning to do it for about a year, and one thing led to another, and it's the old saying that quitters never win and winners never quit.
That's exactly
what
right.
happened to me. I was winning more races than I was losing, and off we went.
First race car was the Datsun 510?
Datsun 510, and it was terrific. And the reason why I chose it, I was in my the beginning of my senior year at Cornell, and I went over to Watkins Glen for an event that they have. They call it the Fun One. It's generally in October. It's generally either rain, snow, sleet, or hail up there. And I got into a conversation with a guy named Bob Henderson, who was then a Nissan, now in those days a Datsun dealer, and he was racing a 510, and I talked to him about it. And I said, look, I'm thinking, he said, look, the only thing you really should take a look at the 510s because there's parts available, which is a key part. Mm-hmm. There's lots of them, and there's lots of people that you can do to vendor out stuff. And so that's how it started.
Right. And the 510 was such a popular car. I mean, I guess, it was almost, for lack of, it's not the same type of car, but the Mazda Miata of the day. I mean, it was the kind of the everyman's race car but then you saw, Sharp doing their stuff on them, and you thought, wow, that's cool looking. That's as cool looking as almost as a Z car, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good analogy because that's a good comparison. Right. I think that's right.
Well,
and they were fast and safe, and like I said, lots of parts. And it was just a good starter.
Sure. And when you got your competition license, was it in a 510 or was it in something else?
510.
It was the 510. So,
510, yeah.
And then you moved on to, I know in the 80s you were racing the infamous Datsun 200 SX. We had Hurley Haywood on a couple of weeks ago talking about he had a race in the 200 SX. They were quite popular back then. Again, kind of the same reason, or?
They were good, but they were solid rear axle cars, unlike the swing arm rear suspension that we had in the 510. So They were a little bit different to tune.
Right.
And if you were on a rough track, you were really, rear end was bouncing around and all. It was a little more of a handful, but utilized several of the same parts, and you had the same backup from the factory.
Right. Well, that was very important in that time, right?
You betcha.
Absolutely. So, and your first national championship was in 81, right?
81, down in Atlanta. It rained, mud, and it started raining, and I realized that I didn't have rain tires, and I went over to Ron Stiller, who was the competition tire rep. And I said, Ron, I don't have any rain tires. What do you got? And he said, well, I've got these knobbies. Nobody's ever used them before. I don't know how they're going to work. Oh. Well, I mounted the knobbies, and I just went slow during the race and just watched all the guys in front of me just burn theirs up. And I ran on the pedals and kept on going. And I had a pretty substantial race win there.
Sure.
That was very rewarding.
Was that in a Firebird? Was that where you were racing back then?
No, I was racing the 200 SX.
Oh, the 200 SX. That's right, right. And then you moved on to the
Firebird. The Firebird came later. We raced again in '82.
Right.
And I said, gee, we really ought to move up. And so the Firebird looked like a good deal. So I had a builder build it. It was a car that I think taught us a lot. It wasn't a very good car, but it taught us a lot. And it was then that I said that, the 4 or 5 guys I had working with me, I said, look, guys, we're going to, Bob Aiken, who was a very dear friend, he said, look, why don't you move up to you're wasting your time in these lower classes. and this car this Pontiac it's a good car, but it's not really what you should be doing. You've done a lot of racing. So he introduced me to Holbert, who I sort of knew from club racing. He didn't do club racing, but I sort of knew him from his involvement in club racing. And so we worked a deal to buy Bruce Levin's 101 car, and off we went.
So you went from the GTO class in a Firebird to a 962 Porsche. So that's,
right.
Wow. Right. I bet you that was an eye-opening experience.
Well, ironically, it's kind of funny. You take a look at these kids that are running the Indy Lights cars. Indy Lights cars are about 450 horsepower.
Right.
And they're light, very small. And you see these kids getting out of them and hopping into big-time Indy cars. and they do a credible job. It was just, to me, it was just a kind of a logical extension, but boy, it was really something to get in the car for the first time and actually run it.
Yeah.
And be able to see the pavement rolling under your feet. It was really, really something. And
wow.
It was really a thrill, but fortunately I adapted to it fairly quickly, and off we went.
Yeah. I mean, they say that the perception or the perspective for the driver in the 956 and the 962 is amazing. It's like nothing else. I mean, it's like it's like you don't even have a car. You're just there. And you raced in '86, both the 956 and the 962, right? Were they similar, or were they completely different?
Well, they were similar. The driving seat and the instrumentation was very similar. But the thing is that the big thing was the 956 that we were running at Le Mans was actually, it belonged to Nick Mason of the
Pink Floyd.
Of Pink Floyd,
yeah.
And it was Nick's car. And Richard Lloyd was running it, and what it was is we had a setup that was a high downforce setup. So we were doing most of the cars were doing between 230 and 235, 240 down the straight. We were doing about 220, 222, but we were faster than them in the corners.
Right.
And we found that as the race went by, we were actually, Price and I, Mauro Baldi was with us, but Mauro left very early on. He got sick, or at least he said he got sick, so he left it up to me and Price. And off we went.
Right.
It rained during the night, and our car was one of the fastest, if not the fastest car on the racetrack.
Wow.
So that was a real great experience.
In the rain at night you got to just be gripping that wheel like, you're never letting go.
Well, I asked Eric Bell, how do you handle the Mulsanne straight? He says, don't let your imagination get away from you.
Well, brilliant, right?
So you have to just look down at the instruments and just watch the countryside go by and do it again 3 minutes later.
Right. Well, it's kind of like flying an airplane. You don't really want to think about that you're actually going 600 miles an hour or whatever.
Right.
That can be. You had some great co-drivers, though, over the years. I mean, I think your most frequent one was James Weaver, 44 races you guys co-drove in.
James and I worked together a lot. James came with us. James was actually working with Bob Aiken, but when Bob gave up the 962 and stopped racing in 962, James came available. We brought James in, and on a temporary basis, I couldn't do the race in Atlanta, so he came down and did it with Price and won it.
Wow.
And I saw the chemistry between the two of them, and I said, well, he's a keeper.
Yeah.
And Price and James ran a lot of races, won a lot of races, and so Price came second in the championship. We won the Porsche Cup 2 years in a row, and
wow.
So and James became a part of that. Price then went on to work for Jaguar.
Right.
And James became our number one, and he worked for us for almost 20 years.
Wow. I mean,
it was just great. I mean, all of my guys were really great. We didn't tolerate. We had one guy that was with us when we first started the prototypes, Drake Olson, and we parted ways, and I'm glad we did, because we found that we could stabilize everything and get everything going, working a lot better.
Sure. And how gratifying, satisfying, whatever the word may be, to race with your son. That's got to be the thrill of a lifetime.
Well, I'll tell you briefly what happened. We were up at Watkins Glen doing some Goodyear tire testing, and Chris was up there with his Formula Ford, his Spec Racer Ford.
Right.
I said, well, shit, why don't we put him let's put him in the car at our test. And we put him in the car at the test, and he just took to it
right
like a drink of water. And he would have qualified in the race the year before. He would have qualified fifth on the grid. So I said,
wow.
So I said to Pat Smith, I said, geez, why don't we bring him on and do the 6 hour with him? And so he joined Elliot and I. Elliot started, Chris got in, Chris did the middle, and I did the end. And what was interesting about it was he did just a terrific job.
Right.
And I don't think we raced that many times together.
Right.
We raced against one another more than we did with one another. But it was great. And, one of my screensavers is a great picture of us down at Daytona when he won the championship. and there's a picture of he and I both in our helmets getting out of the car, and I'm looking at him, shaking his hand.
Right.
It's one of my screensavers. It's one of the great moments in my racing career.
Oh my gosh, how great is that? And other great drivers you raced with, of course, Scott Pruitt and Vern Shupin, Hurley Haywood, John Paul Jr. I mean, golly, Elliott Forbes Robinson. You did a lot of races with him, right?
Oh yeah, and we had Andy Wallace and Marino Franchitti. These guys were, Bobby Real did a couple races with us, and it was just it was a great experience. All our guys were great team members. That's the key to it.
Sure.
Sports car racing, it's not every man for himself. It's you got to get out of the car and hand it over to your co-driver, and the car isn't crashed or bent or the transmission isn't shot.
Right.
So it was important to have guys that knew how to do it, and they did it. And it was just a great fun to work with those guys.
Well, and you have to be not only from the driver's standpoint, a great driver, but a great communicator to the team of what's going on with the car, because with computers and all that, that's all great and well and good. But even today with the Formula One drivers, the seat of the pants stuff is, equally as important as being a good driver.
Yeah, I think Mario characterized all the modern technology as accurately when he said, look, all that data tells you what is, but it doesn't tell you what it should be.
Right.
And so the data helps you, although I have my thoughts about data and balance of performance, but the that's true. I mean, the data is very important to understand how your drivers are matching up.
Right.
When we started getting data and section times and computer runs, and that was toward the tail end of my career.
Right.
It was very helpful to see where the brakes are, where the shifting is, and all of that. All rudimentary and as crude as it was.
Did you find out that you knew less than you thought, or more than you thought, or what was the end result of that? Did you felt?
Well, I think it made it for me. It was better because I wasn't doing this full time. So I'd do maybe 8 or 10 races a year. I couldn't do all the races. And so for me, it gave me a chance to just, how do I measure up? And okay, I see where James or Butch or Elliott are braking. Okay, I got to go that far.
Sure.
And I see what gear they're in when they're going through a fast, high-speed corner. They're in 5th or 6th. I should be in 5th or 6th.
Right.
So it just helped me, but I think it helped all the guys just to kind of understand. It also helped us get the gearing right.
Right.
And a lot quicker.
Well, I mean, I imagine it's got to be, if you see somebody who's out, braking later or doing things differently than you do. I mean, obviously it could be because they have no fear or because their car is completely different. I mean, it's how do you compare the metrics? It's interesting. Well,
I think that that's the difference between heroes and zeros. I mean, you gotta. I mean, you're in the race car. You got to just kind of understand how far you can go.
Sure. Who blew you away when? I mean, not in literally blew you away, but just their driving style and technique and everything they did. Was there somebody that stood out back in the day?
You mean competitors?
Yeah, competitors. Yeah.
Oh, I think there were some great guys. I mean, you race against a Hans Stuck or a Klaus Ludwig or a Derek Bell or a Jochen Maas or Vern Shupin
right.
or Bob Wallach or any of those guys coming over. Kelly Abaretto came over. John Watson came over. I mean, you'd see some of these guys from European teams, and a few of the IndyCar guys would show up. I mean, it was great to have that, to be able to be in the events with them and to compete, and many times beat them.
Right, absolutely.
And so for me as an amateur, I disregard that term. I think I had as much racing experience as many of the guys, but
sure.
but the there were no driver rankings then.
Right.
So you didn't have to stack your driver crew with people that were either purposely old or purposely slow.
Right.
And so, here I am racing against guys that win, that were ex-Formula One ex IndyCar or current Formula One, current IndyCar racing against us, and to stack up with them and be a peer was really kind of a thrill and kind of rewarding.
I absolutely imagine it would have been. I mean, there's. Do you think they had unfair advantages in Europe because of the karting programs they had versus what we did or didn't have here in the U.S.?
Well, probably. The European driving is different, too. I think the guys that drive in Europe, at least when they came over here, they were a little bit more... I don't want to paint with a broad brush. I'm painting with a broad brush here, but most of the time they were all great. But there were a few guys that, they made it a little more difficult to pass, or they'd short break you in a slow corner just to keep you behind and that kind of thing, more than the American guys. There were American guys that did the same thing, but the European guys. But I think that for the young guys, any young kid in Europe is trying to get into Formula One.
Right.
And to do that, you got to start in karting when you're 8 years old. And there was an article, I think, in the New York Times about the money, or maybe the Wall Street Journal, about the money that families are paying in Europe, or even American kids that are being flown over to compete in European karting and try to get into Formula One. And what's interesting is that the top guys in karting aren't necessarily the best guys.
Right.
That, the fact that a kid won a karting championship, it's the kid that finished fifth in a kart that by any stretch of imagination should have finished 15th.
Right.
By dint of his talent and his grit is the one that you got to look at.
Sure. Well, I think that's true with a lot of different sports. I mean, we see that the number one quarterback and the guy who wins the Heisman Trophy every year doesn't always become the greatest player. I mean, I think you see that in all sports and disciplines. So over your career as Dyson Racing Team, you guys have had 19 championships, 72 race victories, 72 starts from pole, and 224 podium finishes. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I got to admit that when I think back on it, we just celebrated our 50th year, and we're putting together a documentary about the race team.
Right.
And so it gave us a chance at our Christmas party, which we held in second week of January, because it's easier on the guys, and the guys are gone so long during the year that we want to let them be with their family during the holidays. But then after the first of the year, we start racing again. So we had our Christmas party, and we brought everybody back. Everybody that could make it back, we brought everybody back.
Wow.
Elliot and Andy, James, Butch, Price, all the guys came back. Max Crawford, who did a lot of vendor work for us, was our chief on a couple of our Daytona wins. Helped Chris immensely in his program. So we were able to do that. And you think back on it, all the memories and everything, and it's really, we're not done yet.
You're right, exactly.
We're not done yet, but it was a great kind of touch base to kind of pat ourselves on the back, which we don't do. And I hadn't really thought about it until my brother-in-law came up to me the year before and said, you're going into your 50th year of racing. Right. I said, I never thought about that. So that kind of put me into the kind of the view that we've got to, for the next Christmas party, we've got to make sure we celebrate it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's an amazing accomplishment, and you kind of went alongside with all the other teams that we've seen and watched over the years too. Penske's organization and all those guys. I mean, they've been doing it for so long, and it's hard to remember. Then you realize, you go, oh, that's 50 years ago. Well, heck, I'm getting old.
So that's part of it. The other thing is that again, it's winners never quit.
Right, and quitters never win. So,
and we've been fortunate that we've had good success, and that kind of keeps you in it.
Sure, absolutely. So, I read also you donated the archives of National Speed Sport. You're talking about Chris Economaki a minute ago to the IMRRC. How cool is that? What a great organization that is. I was at the dinner for Zach Brown. I didn't get to meet you, but what a great organization and a great event.
Well, let me tell you, that deal was interesting. Chris and I got to be very, very good friends. We would meet and have lunch in New York. My offices then, we moved back up to Poughkeepsie near the home, but my offices were in New York in those days. And Chris comes into New York all the time, and we would get together for lunch, and we talk about stuff. And he was just a wonderful guy. I was a pallbearer at his funeral. And then afterwards, I called Corinne and said, Corinne, is there anything I can do to help you? And she says, well, look, frankly, we don't know what to do with the archives.
Right.
And I said, well, okay, I'll tell you what. I won't buy them, but I know who's somebody that will. And Chris, I had talked to Chris about his archives, and he kept on saying, I'm going to send them to the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame. And I said, Chris, they can't handle it. Right. They're not librarians. You need to get this thing in a library. Mm-hmm. And we talked about it often, but Chris never kind of come to grips with it, and I can't blame him. But anyway, for instance, we have every speed sport news ever printed.
Wow.
And I said, good. What we'll do is we'll work a deal with you, but we'll have the International Motor Racing Research Center buy them. And that's why they got up there.
That's so fantastic.
So, I funded that, and I funded it on purpose because I didn't want some private person to have these great archives hidden away out of people's sight. And all I can tell you is when you go up to the museum, if you sit down and go through their archives, they're digitizing most of it. Mm-hmm. But when I got up there and took a look at the books and pulled them down, pulled one off the shelf and just opened it up, just peeled it open.
Right.
And started reading. I mean, I was there for 2.5, 3 hours just reading speech newses from 1976.
Oh, wow.
And Chris Economaki, that editor's notebook he published was just a monumental work of art.
Sure. Well, I think I would argue that the archives are as important as the preservation of the cars. I mean, there are so many items that, like you said, are in private collections that really need to be somewhere publicly available to people because it's, like I said, we're just all stewards of this stuff. It's not ours forever.
And that's the purpose of the museum at Indianapolis, too. We're enhancing the archives there as well.
Sure. I can't wait to see it. It'll be
for the same reason.
I'd be excited to read it. And my last and most important question for you, and the more mundane, the better, what's your daily driver?
My daily driver is, actually, I've got three. I've got a 2005 Subaru Outback wagon with a turbo 4-cylinder and a 5-speed in it.
I want one of those. I have jealousy of that.
It's got 6 positions for CD players, so that's actually one of my daily drivers.
Sure.
I've got a manual transmission 6-speed V6 6-speed Tacoma pickup truck.
Right.
And then I've got a Plaid Tesla Plaid. And but I have a roster of old Model A Fords and stuff. I even have the first car I ever bought,
right?
My Model A Coupe that I roll out in the summer.
And you got some vintage Indy cars too, right?
Got some vintage Indy cars. The oldest one is is an Iasata that raced in Indianapolis in 1913 and 1914.
Wow!
That car is one of the greatest examples of a pre-war Indy car that you can find.
Sure.
Then I've got roster of cars. I got a couple of couple of Eagles. We got 3 McLarens. We got an M16 that Johnny Rutherford drove to second place in 76. That the Gatorade McLaren in 75, rather, one of the great paint schemes ever put on a race car.
So fantastic.
And we've got that car. In fact, we ran it out at Long Beach last year. We're going to run a Santa Ana Eagle that came second to Mario in 69, and a Bardall 66 Bardall car driven by Lloyd Ruby in Indianapolis at Long Beach. We're going to run both cars out of Long Beach
You still got a pretty full calendar there, right?
Oh yeah. Well, the vintage stuff is it's a four event a year thing, and we want to get the cars out, but people see them.
Absolutely, and they need to be run anyway, right? So they need to be exercised like any cars. That's the problem with owning too many cars is trying to exercise them all and keep them in that ready to go peak performance, right?
Well, if a used key is shiny, if you don't run them, they decline. They're machines and they're made to be run.
Absolutely. Rob Dyson, ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate you being on the show today, Rob. And sorry if we kept you a little longer than the time you had, but we were having too much fun talking to you.
Stuart, I appreciate it. I'm honored to be with you, and I can't tell everybody how important your podcast is to everybody. It's great racing history. And what's great about podcasts is you can listen to them serially.
Absolutely.
You've got great guests, and I'm honored to be one of them.
Well, we're just thankful to have you, and thanks to our friend Judy. She helps make things happen for us.
Judy Stropus is a national racing asset.
100% agree with you. She ought to be in every Hall of Fame possible. So
that's exactly right. We'll
Rob,
see you soon.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Go on.
The Classic Auto Mall has more than 1,000 vehicles for consignment in our huge 8-acre climate-controlled showroom. It's a real indoor mall. If you'd like to know all the advantages of buying and selling a car through consignment, the information is available on our website, or you can talk to a classic car specialist who can answer all your questions. It's easy, safe, convenient, and it doesn't matter where you are. We sell worldwide. See our huge selection of classic and collectible vehicles at classicautomall.com.
How fun was that? That was awesome. He was so great.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Real good. And like I said, those guys have so many names and contacts they've had over the years. How do they remember all those names?
Yeah, we were saying off air once we said goodbye to Rob that how do they remember all these scenarios? Like what gear I was in when I did a slide through turn 3 at the Indy, in 1967, and it was a cloudy day and
I wanted to be at 7,000 RPM, but it was only 6,800.
Yeah, I mean the memory that they have of these things, and I guess it's because it's so important. I mean, first of all, your life is on the line. Second of all, it is your career. So why wouldn't you remember it? I mean, it's no different than us knowing about cars that are here and different things about cars. It's you get it. But it's quite impressive that these guys can do that. And
if you asked me who I worked with 20 years ago, I would be like,
no, a guy named Bob.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I worked with a guy named Bob. I'm certain there was a Bob. So
yeah, Bob.
Yeah, old Bob. Good old Bob.
I've never been good at remembering my enemies. That's not good.
You need to remember them in case you run into them later in life,
Yes.
right? How about where did we sell cars the past week? My goodness gracious. Mainsburg, Pennsylvania, Langhorne, Pennsylvania, Norfolk, Virginia, Thornton, Colorado, Dallas, Texas, Sunbury, Pennsylvania, Fishers, Indiana, Stockton, California, Hampstead, Maryland, Potomac, Maryland, Skillman, Maryland, Erie, Pennsylvania, San Carlos, California, New Hope, Pennsylvania, Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania, Ephrata, Pennsylvania, Fleetwood, Pennsylvania, West Pittston, Pennsylvania, Durham, North Carolina, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, St. Petersburg, Florida, Bardo, Pennsylvania, Beaumont, Texas, Soudertown, Pennsylvania, Newtown, Pennsylvania.
Wow, Pennsylvania.
Got a little head rush there.
On the map to hello, West Pittston. I know Pittston, Pennsylvania very well. Yeah,
shout out to West Pittston.
Shout out to Pittston.
Hello. Hello.
But correction for one of our neighbors, I think it's Ephrata. I was correct.
Oh, it's Ephrata. It can't be Ephrata.
It's Ephrata.
I'm afraid to say that.
Oh.
That's really close to us.
Yeah, it's very close. Yeah, it's the next bedroom community down the way.
Town
right?
south, yep.
So new arrivals, we'll get through those quickly since we've spent so much time with our fantastic guests, who I could have talked to for another hour.
Sure.
I mean, enjoying that like nobody's business. And like he said, so glad that we're archiving so many of these things. In 50 years from now, we hope that it means something to somebody. Somebody will stumble across one of these podcasts or shows and think, oh, how cool. And I never knew that. And, the amount of information that's out there is amazing, but it doesn't beat. You can never get that from a book of what we just had with him as a guest.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
new arrivals. How about the 31 Ford Model A Roadster, stone brown and black over saddle, older frame off restoration, 201 cubic inch 4-cylinder, 3-speed Manion. It's a Manion.
Speed Manion.
I think it must be a manual.
That's right.
LeBaron Bonney interior. Also, the 1970 Volkswagen Type 2 bus. Boy, these are popular.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Custom window work on this one though. It's really cool. It's got the flat 4 1600cc engine, solid bus, clean interior, 4-speed manual transmission. So, and it's probably 0 to 60 and
60 in 60 seconds.
Yeah. I always loved these cars back in the day. The 2002 Mercedes-Benz CLK430 Cabriolet. They had no trunk space.
Right.
And it didn't matter.
No.
This one's quartz blue over gray and dark blue. 79,000 actual miles. Great color combination on this car. 4.3-liter SOH single overhead cam V8, 5-speed automatic, and very well maintained. These cars were sexy back in the day. You saw a lot of them on the road, and that was kind of a dream car to have as kind of the SL of the day, the 450 SL of the day, I should say, because they got so pricey that you really couldn't afford one like you could maybe back in the 70s. So, how about the 1973 Volvo 1800 ES station wagon?
It's still here?
I know. I can't believe it. I don't know how to pronounce this. Sonne?
I don't know. Sonne? Is it French? I had to look it up.
Yellow over black. Fuel-injected 2-liter 4-cylinder. Borg-Warner 3-speed automatic. Kind of unusual. 4-wheel power disc brakes, optional AC and roof rack. A solid skate, eh?
A solid skate.
Yeah. And this one is the one that you'll never see. The 1867 Roper steam cycle replica.
Yes.
Built by our buddy up in Connecticut who builds the craziest things you've ever seen. This thing is wood over black. It's an exacting replica. The craftsmanship that this guy does is second to none.
It's incredible,
It's just hard to believe. He makes engines out of wood that you go, that looks like a real engine. And then you realize it's wood. So A, it's not a real engine. And B, he hand carved this whole thing.
That's it.
I mean, I don't know
hand shapes aluminum.
I don't know how people have enough time to do this. I could barely get through the day.
Well, he's got to sell 1 or 2 a year, and then he's good for the rest of the year to just create stuff.
Certainly one of a kind. And last but not least, the 1968 Plymouth Barracuda Formula Convertible Tribute, black over red, rebuilt 364 barrel, rebuilt A833 4-speed manual, large bolt pattern brakes, 323 rear axle, and it's got power top and power front disc brakes.
How about that?
Or power disc brakes, excuse me. So that's our new arrivals this week. And, the consignments, of course, slow down a little bit this time of year because of the weather. And if it's raining or snowing or sleeting or whatever, then a lot of people say, maybe not going to bring my car, which is fine. It gives us a chance to catch our breath a little.
Yeah.
We've caught our breath. Now we're ready. So start bringing them in.
Sun will come out and the cars will start coming in.
And the car shows, like you said earlier, the car shows are starting up. And of course, I wanted to deep dive, not deep dive, because we don't have much time for that, but I wanted to dive into a question that we didn't know the answer to a couple of weeks ago, which was what was a factory high impact car?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And I did know that because I wrote it, and I just didn't remember that.
Oh, that's even worse.
Yeah.
So your last check will be when
I told you my memory.
No.
If I had Rob Dyson's memory, I'd be a CEO, wouldn't I?
Exactly. It refers to Mopar's 10 high-impact colors from 1969 to 73. And these are Dodge first and Plymouth second. Bright green, rally green, go mango, vitamin C, butterscotch, Bahama yellow, Hemi orange, Tor red, plum crazy, in violet, sublime or limelight, green go or sassy grass, panther pink or Moulin Rouge, top banana or lemon twist, citron yellow or curious yellow. Now, the ones that Chrysler rejected, Catch Me Copper, Unforeseeable Fuchsia.
That's good. That's good.
Hi-Ho Silver, Well Red, Cost of Living Rose, Fisher Body Rust, and Frank Lloyd White.
Oh, that's funny. That's classic.
So, it was making me crazy not knowing any of this.
I wonder if Hi-Ho Silver was trademarked. That had to be a trademark.
I like the slam on GM's Fisher Body.
Fisher Body
Rust. But Unforeseeable Fuchsia.
That's
good.
great.
So Curious Yellow, which was the color of the car we were talking about.
Right.
Curious was either from Curious George and the yellow,
which was yellow.
They used it in the
bananas.
Yeah, the guy, right? He dressed in yellow. Or there was a movie. There was a Swedish movie called Curious Something. That was sort of like an
I Am Curious Yellow. Wasn't that the movie?
Was that the movie? I don't know. No, it was X-rated. So maybe you have.
I would know.
Boy, he just set you up for that one, didn't he? Yeah.
Triple R rated.
After you agree to knowing something. Oh, by the way, did you know it was only shown in prison?
It was right. It was outlawed in the United States.
Yeah, and so only people in prison and in Leavenworth were able to see. Oh, so you must have been in Leavenworth. See?
A couple of those movies were like black market movies back in the day, and that was one of them.
Yeah. So
the Plum Crazy. That was Plymouth color.
Dodge was Plum Crazy, and In Violet was Plymouth.
Yeah,
I love Plum Crazy.
Yeah. And what about the other one that we didn't see, which is not really a funny name, but B5 Blue? That's a big Mopar color.
Yeah.
That bluish. It's almost like a royal blue.
Mm-hmm. Is that like the Richard Petty blue?
Sort of, but not exactly that. A little darker than Richard Petty blue is just some guy mixed up some paint apparently, and they said that'll work. Yeah. And it did. So I'm so excited about next week coming up. Today being what is today? The 18th of 19th of February of 2025. And next week, and of course, we talked about with Rob Dyson, is the auction coming up at Miami RM sale. We're going to sell these. Oh my God, the list of cars that they have are just amazing. It is.
These are cars from the Indianapolis 500 Museum.
No, from the Indianapolis Motor Museum, and they've already sold the 1954 Mercedes Streamliner for $52 million.
Isn't that enough for an endowment? I don't know how museums work.
Yeah. The 1964 Ferrari 250 LM for $36 million. Now they've got a 1907 Italia Works racing car, estimated $2 to $3 million. The 1965 Spirit of America Sonic 1, Craig Breedlove's car, with 15,000 pounds of thrust, 500,000 to $1 million. So, might be in the ballpark there if I was looking for another car.
Right. They used to run the jet dragsters at US 30 dragsters outside of Chicago, and one of the jets they had a little timing building or something behind it, and the jet blew the building down. Right. It was so much thrust.
Yeah, it's one of one. Top speed, 600 miles per hour.
Sure, wow. Practical.
Yeah. They also have a 1966 Ford GT40 Mark II that we talked about, estimated $8 to $11 million.
Absolutely.
One of 8 built. It's got a 427 NASCAR V8 with 485 horsepower. It doesn't sound like a lot today, but back then in a lightweight car, it certainly was.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we talked about the 57 Chevrolet Corvette SS XP64, estimate $5 to $7 million. First purpose-built GM race car, magnesium body, as we spoke about, one of 2 built. Early fuel-injected car and early 4-speed manual.
It's cool.
An American-flavored D-type Jaguar, they called it. Then a 1991 Benetton Formula One car driven by Michael Schumacher to 4th place in the South African Grand Prix. And the Bugatti Type 35 Grand Prix 1930 and a 1908 Mercedes, which he alluded to, a 1911 Mercedes, a 1911 Lauren and Clement Type S2 Sport Wagon, whatever the heck that is. So some really cool stuff coming up to the sale, and it'll be exciting to watch and see what happens. And Drive to Survive, our F1 show, is coming out in March. That'll get us geared up for the 2025 F1 season with Lewis Hamilton in red at Ferrari this year. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
I had heard that, I don't know if I'm not a metallurgist, but I had heard that magnesium will burn. It's
right.
Metal will burn. So having a race car body made out of magnesium.
Well, it's weight saving.
So you're not a metallurgist? Because I thought on your resume it said that you were a metallurgist, and that was one of the reasons we hired you.
Caught again.
Metallurgist.
Darn it. It's the older you get, the harder it is to keep up with your lies.
Yeah.
It's really
I knew a guy that said, I don't lie because it's too much to remember.
It's too damn much to remember. So, all right. Well, thanks for joining us on show number 181. Next week's guest is GM engineer, extraordinary GM engineer, Herb Fischel will be with us. And future guests are coming up. We've got the head restoration guy, Brian Martin, I believe his name is, from McPherson College. And some other exciting guests coming up as well, too. So we'll catch you next week on the Classic Auto Mall Show. See you then.
You've been listening to the Classic Auto Mall Show with your host, Stewart Howden, executive producer, Steve Safir, produced and engineered by yours truly, J.R. Russ. Available on ClassicAutomall.com, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Music courtesy of the Pat Travers Band. For tour dates, contact, and stuff, visit PatTravers.com. Produced by Car Smarts Media. Copyright all rights reserved.